History Assignment Week 2. This is a preview of the published version of the quiz. Started March 29th at 9:38 a.m. Quiz instructions. Read the following passage and respond to the questions below. If you would like for this quiz to be read aloud to you, click the video below. Caught in the middle, U.S. Civil War forced Mexican Americans to take sides. Image 1. Colonel Santos Benavides, left, became the highest-ranking Mexican-American officer in the Confederacy. His most notable victory was the defense of his hometown of Laredo, Texas. Lieutenant Colonel Manuel Chavez, right, played a crucial role in the Union victory at Glorieta, attacking and destroying the Confederate supply train. Photos by National Park Service via Wikimedia Commons. In 1861, tens of thousands of Mexican Americans were living in the territories of California, Texas, and New Mexico. Just 20 years earlier, these lands were a part of Mexico. Then, after the Mexican-American War, the United States claimed these territories as its own. The American Civil War broke out in 1861. The wounds of the Mexican-American War were still fresh when people living in these formerly Mexican lands found themselves in the middle of the United States war with itself. At first, Mexican Americans in Texas, commonly known as Tejanos, tried to avoid declaring support for either side, says Sonia Hernandez. She's a professor at Texas A&M University. She teaches history and Latino, Latina and Mexican American studies. Some Tejanos avoided the conflict, but others chose sides. Some outright avoided joining either side because Tejanos were accused of disloyalty even before the war officially broke out, she writes. By claiming Mexican citizenship, Tejanos could avoid being forced to join the U.S. military, and some were in fact Mexican citizens. Hernandez writes. Still others, overwhelmed with the growing divide, chose sides. Jerry D. Thompson is a history professor at Texas A&M International University. He estimates a few thousand Mexican Americans joined the Confederate troops and more than 10,000 joined the Union Army and militia. Though there was some overlap, most Mexican Americans who joined the Union lived in the U.S. territory of New Mexico or the state of California. Meanwhile, most who joined the Confederacy lived in Texas, one of the states that opted to leave the Union. At least 2,500 Tejanos joined the Confederate Army. Mexico had banned slavery in 1829. This was several years after the country won its independence from Spain. Some Mexican Americans might have joined the Union because they opposed U.S. slavery. There is some evidence that there was a mini underground railroad here in South Texas that was largely fueled by Tejanos, usually poor Tejanos. Who would help runaway slaves escape into Mexico, says Thompson. We know there were thousands of runaway slaves in Mexico. At the same time, some wealthy Mexican Americans owned slaves, and their income depended on the slave trade. You also had well-to-do individuals like Colonel Santos Benavides here in Laredo, who actually became the highest-ranking Tejano officer in the Confederate Army, says Thompson. There are instances of him acting as a slave catcher, where he's actually going into Mexico and retrieving these runaway slaves and returning them to their masters, for which he was compensated. Prejudice from white soldiers on both sides. Many Mexican-American Civil War soldiers deserted their positions in the military. This was mostly because of the prejudice they experienced from white soldiers on both sides, according to the National Park Service. There was even one Tejano captain, Adrian J. Vidal, who had joined the Confederacy and then deserted to the Union. He then deserted the Union Army, too. This time, he went to fight against the French colonists in Mexico who supported the Confederacy. There were other reasons Mexican Americans might have wanted to join the Union. In the early 1840s, the white-run Republic of Texas had invaded New Mexico. At the time, New Mexico's lands were still part of Mexico. The invasion was an attempt to seize more land. This led to a deep resentment in New Mexico of Texans, Thompson says. The vast majority of Mexican Americans in the New Mexico Territory who entered the war fought for the Union. It had promised a payment of up to $300 for those who became soldiers. In contrast, the Civil War deeply divided the Mexican Americans of Texas, Thompson writes for the Texas State Historical Association. Tejanos who joined the state's Confederate militia units frequently did so out of a fear of being sent out of the state and away from their families. Some were able to avoid forced military duty by claiming they were residents of Mexico. In Texas, many Tejanos were angry with white Texans for taking away their land. They might have joined the Union as a form of revenge, Hernandez suggests. Others simply wanted to remain in the area, and it was easier if they supported the Union. To stay and protect their communities as opposed to being sent to other parts of the South, she writes. Mexican Americans fought both far away and close to home. Mexican Americans who joined the Confederacy fought as far away as Virginia and Pennsylvania. But Mexican American soldiers in the Union fought closer to home. They helped secure key victories in the Southwest. In March 1862, Lieutenant Colonel Manuel Chavez led Union troops in an attack on a Confederate supply train at the Battle of Glorieta Pass. The Union victory helped push the Confederacy out of New Mexico for good. It later earned Glorieta a nickname, the Gettysburg of the West, referring to the famous Civil War battle in Pennsylvania. Today, Glorieta Pass is part of Pecos National Historical Park. It's also a marker of Mexican Americans' contributions to the U.S. military. Why is the history of Mexicans during the U.S. Civil War such a complicated history? Cite at least 2 pieces of evidence from the article that highlights how Mexicans were involved and how their involvement is not a straightforward issue.